my privilege to present the Oscar for the Best Performance by an Actor.
The world remembers Sophia Loren as one of cinema's great beauties, the sculpted cheekbones, the smoky eyes, the walk that seemed to slow down every room she entered. Magazines built entire mythologies around her glamour. But underneath the gowns and the flashbulbs was a woman who spent her childhood hungry, hid from bombs in a railway tunnel, and later went to prison rather than run from a fight she believed she hadn't started. The polished legend is real, but it is only the surface. The real story of Sophia Loren is about survival, and about a woman who kept choosing the harder, truer path every time an easier one was placed in front of her. She was born Sophia Villani Ciccolone on September 20th, 1934, in a charity maternity ward in Rome reserved for women who weren't married to the fathers of their children. Her father, Riccardo Ciccolone, refused to marry her mother, Romilda Villani, and drifted in and out of his daughters' lives without ever fully claiming them. For years, Sophia and her younger sister Maria carried a surname that connected them, on paper, to a man who barely acknowledged their existence. There was no glamour in the years that followed. The family settled in Pozzuoli, a working-class port town near Naples, crowding into a small home with relatives, stretching what little food there was across too many mouths. Sophia was so thin that other children in the neighborhood nicknamed her the toothpick. It wasn't a joke about her figure, it was a plain description of a child who wasn't getting enough to eat. Then came the war. Pozzuoli sat near a harbor and a munitions works, which made it a target for Allied bombing raids. Sophia and her family fled more than once to a railway tunnel that served as an improvised bomb shelter, spending long nights in the dark among rats and the distant thud of explosions. During one raid, shrapnel caught her on the chin, leaving a scar that studio lighting technicians would spend years learning to soften. She would say later in life that she still preferred to sleep with a light on, a small, lasting trace of those nights underground. If there is one person who made Sophia Loren's story possible, it's her mother. Romilda Villani was a gifted pianist who, as a young woman, had won a look-alike contest for her resemblance to Greta Garbo, a contest whose prize was a screen test and a ticket toward a career in film. Her own mother refused to let her go. The dream Romilda never got to chase didn't disappear. It simply waited, and it eventually found its way into her daughter instead. After the war, Romilda kept the family afloat any way she could, including turning their cramped living room into an informal gathering spot for Allied soldiers stationed nearby, playing piano in exchange for the bread and chocolate the soldiers brought with them, small luxuries that, in that era, were closer to survival than treats. She was also the one who pushed Sophia toward local beauty contests, sewing a dress out of old curtains so her daughter would have something presentable to wear. It was Romilda who eventually took a teenage Sophia to Rome for the Miss Italia pageant in 1950. Sophia didn't win the main title, but she placed well enough to catch attention, and that attention was the door into the film world. Her earliest jobs in the industry were unglamorous, uncredited crowd work on films shot at Rome's Cinecittà studios, along with modeling for the illustrated photoromance magazines popular in Italy at the time, under the name Sophia Lazzaro. It was low-paying, low-status work. But it put her in rooms with people who could open bigger doors, and one of those people would change the entire direction of her life. At that same 1950 pageant, a film producer named Carlo Ponti sat on the judging panel. Ponti was 22 years older than Sophia, already established and influential in Italian cinema, and already married. He approached the teenager after the contest and encouraged her to keep entering pageants and pursuing film work. It was a small conversation that quietly reset the course of her life. Ponti began shaping her career almost immediately. The name Sophia Lazzaro was retired, and in its place came a new one, Sophia Loren, reportedly inspired by the Swedish actress Marta Torn, a name built to travel, easy to say in any language, stripped of the regional Neapolitan sound of Ciccolone. Ponti steered her out of photoromance work and into serious film roles, and crucially, he introduced her to the director Vittorio De Sica, a filmmaker who would go on to draw out some of the most important performances of her career. Ponti didn't just see a beautiful young woman, he recognized a genuine talent and worked to build a career around it rather than simply market a face. The professional relationship became personal, and by the time Sophia was 19, they were involved romantically. The math was uncomfortable by any measure, a married man in his 40s with a teenage star he had helped create. In a country where Catholic tradition shaped public and legal life deeply, the relationship drew exactly the kind of judgment you'd expect. Many assumed Ponti was simply controlling a young, impressionable actress for his own benefit. Sophia spent much of her life pushing back against that narrative. She resisted being cast as someone's discovery or someone's project. What mattered to her, she said, was that he believed in her work, and that belief turned out to be durable enough to survive decades of public pressure. In 1957, Italy had no legal path to divorce. That single fact defined the next decade of Sophia and Carlo's relationship. Ponti was still legally married to his first wife, Giuliana Fiastri, and Italian law offered no way for him to end that marriage and begin a new one. So the couple did what a number of Italians in similar situations did at the time. They used a Mexican proxy marriage, a ceremony conducted with legal stand-ins while the actual couple remained elsewhere. On paper, in Mexico, they were husband and wife. In Italy, the marriage meant nothing except trouble. Prosecutors moved to charge Ponti with bigamy. Catholic newspapers went after Sophia directly, and church authorities made their disapproval public. What had been, in the couple's eyes, a private commitment became a national scandal, argued about in newsprint by people who had never met either of them. By 1962, with criminal bigamy charges still hanging over Ponti, the couple made the extraordinary choice to annul their own marriage just to defuse the legal danger. They left Italy for France, where the two eventually secured French citizenship. French law allowed what Italian law wouldn't: an actual divorce from Fiastri, followed by a real, legally recognized marriage to Sophia. That ceremony finally took place on April 9, 1966, 9 years after the Mexican proxy wedding that had first made them outlaws in their own country. In 1968, Italian courts dismissed the original bigamy case on a technicality, long after the version of events that mattered, public shame, exile, years of legal jeopardy, had already played out. While the marriage scandal dragged through Italian courts, Sophia's film career was pulling her toward Hollywood and toward one of its most sought-after leading men. She worked opposite Cary Grant twice in the late 1950s, first in The Pride and the Passion, alongside Frank Sinatra, then in the romantic comedy Houseboat. Grant, established, charming, and one of the most eligible men in American film, fell for her in earnest. He wrote to her. He pursued her openly. Eventually, he asked her to marry him. She said no. It's worth sitting with what that decision actually meant. Marrying Cary Grant would have meant an easy, glamorous entry into the heart of the American studio system. No scandal, no exile, no bigamy charges, no fighting a foreign legal system for a decade. Staying with Carlo Ponti meant continuing to live inside all of that difficulty. She chose the harder situation anyway, because it was the one that felt true to her rather than convenient. It's a decision that says more about her character than almost any film role she ever took. A different kind of image from this era became iconic on its own. A 1957 dinner photograph from Romanoff's in Los Angeles, showing Sophia seated at a table with actress Jane Mansfield leaning dramatically toward the camera in a low-cut dress. Sophia's expression in the photo, somewhere between amused, guarded, and simply unimpressed, has been endlessly analyzed. What the picture really shows is a woman fully present in the middle of Hollywood spectacle, while remaining, in some essential way, apart from it. She never fully assimilated into the American system. She kept her accent, her name, and her working relationship with Italian cinema, and she kept faith with the choice she'd made about Ponti. In 1960, Vittorio De Sica cast her in Two Women, La Ciociara in Italian, adapted from Alberto Moravia's novel about a mother and daughter trying to survive the collapse of order in wartime Italy. Sophia was initially offered the daughter's role. She asked to play the mother instead, a woman roughly 15 years older than she actually was at the time. It wasn't a stretch built on technique alone. She drew directly on her own memory of hiding from bombs, of hunger, of the particular fear of a childhood spent uncertain whether there would be food tomorrow. The film's most devastating scene, in which the mother and daughter are assaulted by soldiers inside a church after their town falls, is stripped of anything resembling the polished screen persona audiences associated with her. That rawness is exactly why the performance landed so hard. She wasn't performing glamour. She was working from something lived. At the 34th Academy Awards in April 1962, Sophia was so convinced she had no chance of winning, a foreign-language performance taking the top acting prize in American cinema seemed, to her, close to impossible, that she didn't even travel to the ceremony. She stayed in Italy with Carlo Ponti, and the two of them waited up through the night as the time difference played out. Early the next morning, the phone rang with the news. She'd won, becoming the first performer ever to win an Academy Award for a non-English language role. On the line afterward was Cary Grant, offering his congratulations. After she hung up, By her own account, she went back to the kitchen to check on a sauce she'd left cooking. The moment tells you something real about her. She had just made Oscar history, and she still went back to check on dinner. By the mid-1960s, Sophia Loren had an Oscar, international fame, French citizenship, and, finally, after 9 years, a legal marriage. The one thing she wanted most kept slipping away from her. She endured a string of miscarriages through much of the decade, each one a private grief that no professional triumph could offset. Family mattered to her in a way that traced directly back to her own childhood, growing up without a present father, carrying a surname that marked her and her sister as the illegitimate branch of the family. She wasn't willing to treat wanting a child as something that would simply happen or not happen. She sought out a specialist, Dr. Hubert de Watteville in Geneva, whose recommendation wasn't surgery but time, rest, and extended bed rest. One of the most famous women alive spent months at a stretch, lying largely still in a Geneva clinic, trading career momentum for a chance at the family she wanted. It worked. Carlo Ponti Jr. was born in Geneva on December 29, 1968, followed by a second son, Eduardo, on January 6, 1973. Carlo Jr. grew up to become an orchestral conductor. Eduardo became a filmmaker. And decades later, it would be Eduardo who saw something in his aging mother that the industry had mostly stopped looking for and built a role specifically to draw it out. In 1974, Sophia's accountant filed her Italian tax return using a deferred payment structure tied to income from De Sica's film The Voyage, relying on what was then treated as an accepted tax amnesty arrangement. Italian tax authorities later decided the arrangement was improper, and the dispute stretched through the courts for 8 years. By May 1982, a 30-day prison sentence had been confirmed, along with an active warrant. Most people in her position, with the means to simply stay away, might have. Sophia flew to Rome and turned herself in. At 57 years old, one of the most recognizable women on the planet walked into the minimum security women's prison at Caserta, near Naples, choosing to face the sentence at home rather than remain in exile from it. Fans gathered outside the prison walls at night to sing to her. Burt Reynolds reportedly sent a telegram joking about staging a rescue. The Italian press treated it as a genuine national event, one of the country's most famous actresses, behind bars over a paperwork dispute. She served 17 days of the 30-day sentence before her release on June 5, 1982, maintaining throughout that the error had been her accountant's, not hers. 3 decades later, in 2013, Italy's Court of Cassation, the country's highest appellate court, agreed with her, ruling that her 1974 tax filing had in fact been calculated correctly. She called the ruling a kind of miracle of justice, arriving 31 years after she'd already served the time for a mistake the courts eventually admitted she hadn't made. One more complicated thread runs through the family record, not because Sophia had any hand in it, but because it stayed part of her story regardless. Her sister Maria married Romano Mussolini, a jazz pianist and son of Benito Mussolini, which made Sophia the aunt by marriage of the politician Alessandro Mussolini. It's the kind of detail biographies mention because it happened, even though it never fit comfortably into the rest of a narrative. On January 10, 2007, Carlo Ponti died in Geneva at age 94. His death closed out more than 50 years of shared history. He had been her producer, her manager, the man who renamed her, the man she defied both church and state to stay with, and eventually her legally married husband. Sophia was 72. The structure that had organized nearly her entire adult life was gone, and for a long stretch afterward, she stepped away from film almost entirely. By that point, Hollywood had already given her its own form of closure, an honorary Academy Award in 1991, recognizing a career that had crossed successfully between Italian and American cinema in a way few of her contemporaries ever managed. It would have been reasonable to assume the story was essentially finished, a legend settling quietly into retirement in Geneva, accepting tributes, letting the myth calcify. Then her son Eduardo called with script, an adaptation of Romain Gary's novel, The Life Before Us, set in the southern Italian port city of Bari, about a Holocaust survivor named Madame Rosa who runs an informal daycare for the children of sex workers and forms a bond with a young orphan boy. There was nothing glamorous in the role. It demanded age, exhaustion, grief, and total honesty on screen, with none of the polish the public had spent 70 years associating with her name. She took it. They filmed in Bari in the late summer of 2019. Netflix acquired the film, released internationally as The Life Ahead, and launched it worldwide in November 2020. Sophia was 86 years old, and the performance reached the Netflix top 10 in dozens of countries within its first week. Critics who hadn't thought seriously about her work in years suddenly did, and what they found connected straight back to two women, the same willingness to appear on screen not as an icon, but as someone marked by hardship and still, unmistakably alive. So what really happened to Sophia Loren? In the most direct sense, she never stopped. The industry that built her image moved through decades of change around her. The country that once imprisoned her over a tax dispute eventually admitted it had gotten the math wrong. The man who had shaped and shared her adult life died, and still she kept working, kept showing up, kept choosing roles that asked something real of her rather than roles that simply repeated the legend. Somewhere underneath the Oscar, the honorary Oscar, the decades of headlines, and the endless commentary on her beauty, there was still the same girl who once picked through the wreckage of a bombed-out Italian port town, already learning, long before anyone was watching, exactly how to keep going.